Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serve Pro. I am to use the word in the name, I try to be a pro. So let me tell you today what that's going to look like here on this show. To be frank, as a human being, I'm a little annoyed by what's going on with Georgia and G-Day. We have talked about that plenty over the course of this spring. However, today, I am not going to let that ruin what needs to be a really fun show for us. So we'll do a little bit of the G-Day stuff and what we learned yesterday at the end of today's show. We'll do a little bit of that also at the end of our conversation with Connor Riley here today too, but only a little bit because I'm looking forward to March Madness. I'm so excited about that. One of the great sporting events. Great to have Georgia part of that. And we also love spring practice rumors. We've got some of those today to have a good time with. I'm also going to let some of y'all have fun at my expense, which is always something that someone in my position should be willing to do. So we're going to have tons of fun. Then at the very end of the show, I'm going to, be a little critical of what I think is a disappointing, turn of events for Georgia, for college football, and for everything else. But not until the end. Until then, it's all fun. Starting right now, it is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serve Pro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Serve Pro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Cannot wait for Thursday. Can't get here soon enough. NCAA Tournament, Dawgs back in it. I think the matchup with Gonzaga is fascinating. And I think Georgia's chances of pulling what is, let's be honest here, kind of a sizable upset are perhaps better than maybe some realize. Over the course of our time, we're going to do some of that on today's show, and I have a special announcement too. All of that coming up here. So that's going to be a great time here today. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Instead, though, let me start with this. Maybe my favorite thing, one of my favorite things in the world this time of year. And boy, when you start transitioning from winter, which we hate, to better weather, springtime, which we love, there's a lot to be excited about when it comes to a sports fan this time of year. But for me in particular, one of the things that I love maybe most of all, and it's just the nature of me as a Georgia football fan, I reckon, but one of the things that I love most of all are those spring practice rumors. And not all of them are true. And frankly, I almost don't care, as weird as that is, if the rumor ends up being true. Sometimes I just like the fact that the rumor exists. And sometimes I just like the fact that if you bump into one of your friends who's a Georgia fan, little bump rule, and he says, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? I love that conversation so much. Or if you maybe haven't heard about so-and-so, I love the little tiny sense of anticipation you get while you're waiting to have the rumor, the secret revealed to you. I love all that kind of stuff. And there's always going to be an economy around the sort of Georgia football rumors and things like that. And because of that, there'll always be a little bit of an exaggeration, a little bit of a wishful thinking that produces some things that can't quite be validated, end up not being verified. Of course, that's always going to be the case. But as I said before, I kind of don't care. I just sort of like the fact that they exist. And if you are bumping into your friends at the lunch counter or the water cooler or wherever it is that you go, or if you're kind of congregating social media, places online, things like that, you've perhaps seen the chatter about a few things related to Georgia Spring Practice. Some of this stuff we've actually been talking about for quite some time. Elijah Griffin, we've been all over that. It seems like early buzz would suggest, yeah, you know what? Seems like this is probably a pretty good player. Shockingly, the number one defensive line in America has turned out to be pretty good in his early days here as a Georgia Bulldog. We've had some fun with that. However, the new thing that you're hearing a little bit about, perhaps you've seen this, there's certainly plenty of chatter, is incoming freshman running back Bo Walker. There has been some talk about the fact that, hey, Walker, he looks good. And all of this is interesting because based on recruiting rankings, whereas a guy like Elijah Griffin would, of course, be expected to come in and dazzle. Well, in the case of Bo Walker, probably not as highly touted of an incoming freshman. And so, therefore, some of the stuff that you may be hearing about him, depending on which corner of the internet you're congregating or who it is that you might be running into that perhaps knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, some of this seems just a little bit more surprising. Now, what's interesting is, if you want to go back to last week, I believe it was Thursday, some of the Georgia media folks, the folks who were there covering the team on a daily basis, were invited to get a little bit of a look at Georgia practice. And it would seem that some of what we have been hearing and continue to hear about Bo Walker, the freshman running back, was at least partially validated by what our Connor Riley, who, by the way, we'll have on the show to speak to coming up in a couple of minutes, was at least partially validated by what Connor himself was able to see firsthand. Let me read this to you on the screen here for a moment. Connor Riley on Bo Walker from Georgia practice last week. Connor writing that Walker is a well-put-together athlete. The freshman running back isn't the tallest player in the room at 5'9", but he seems to have the type of body that can take and dole out punishment. Very interesting to see how big of a role he can carve out this spring. Connor goes on to write, don't forget Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson are both recovering from injuries. And, of course, Nate Frazier's looked every part of being the number one running back while going through drills. He also mentions that the recent transfer, Micah Bell, working at the running back position here, too, coming over from Vanderbilt. So all of that to say running back position, certainly a position of intrigue for Georgia. But in particular, you look at the body type, you look at the kind of the lower center of gravity, you see a guy that's, just seems built for absorbing the SEC-style contact, and all of a sudden that gets pretty interesting. We were talking about this a little bit yesterday, and we had, commenter mention something to the effect of, well, gosh, you look at that body style, sometimes, in football, being big is what you want to be. But there are moments in which, hey, maybe not being the biggest guy in the world, maybe that sort of helps you. And the comparison gets made like an Ashton Genty, or if you want to go to a Barry Sanders. And I'm laughing as I say that because obviously all of that is way too much after just a couple of practices, but that doesn't stop the conversation itself from being worth having, even if our instinct is to always take it to a degree too far. And if we've gotten to the point we're comparing him to Barry Sanders, we've clearly taken it too far. But still, that doesn't stop it from being a fun conversation worth discussing. However, I've told you this many times before. As someone who sort of lives in the rumor mill and sort of, kind of wades into those waters on a regular basis, understanding how to consume this information, and not just what Connor wrote, but, what, others will say, understanding how to consume that information, I think becomes pretty important. Like, what do you make of, whether it be Walker or somebody else, and there will be others this spring, what do you make of early buzz about any player? This year, previous years, future years, it's always going to happen during spring. There is very little eyewitness accounts, and in the future there may even be less. More on that later on the show. But there's always going to be people who are there, people who said this, and people who said that. So how do you process these rumors? Well, I thought yesterday our guy, Jon Stinchcomb, the former Georgia All-American, gave some really good insight on that. And I asked Jon about this, and Walker in particular, because the fact that Jon's been on practice field. He's been a part of this. As a veteran player, seeing newcomers come in, at one point in time, maybe even a newcomer himself. So he kind of knows what it looks like to see somebody make a name for themselves in early Georgia practices. And so when someone apparently does that, when that news kind of matriculates its way back to us, as a fan or someone who tries to be, a media person, whatever else, how do you process that information? And how meaningful is that to you? I thought that Jon Stinchcomb yesterday had a couple of very interesting things to say about that. So let me go back in time to yesterday's program to hear Jon Stinchcomb on that topic.
If it's one time, it's fun. If it's two or three times, then it's like, okay, it's piqued my interest. And the more consistent it is. Another name is Nate Frazier. We did the same thing in spring ball last year, and as training camp rolled around, continued to flash, and you're going, hey, there might be something to this. And I think that's what you're looking for, is the consistency. As they have more practices, there's going to be a wide receiver, a young wide receiver that has a big splash play that you got to see at a scrimmage, and you're going, hey, that's exciting. And what you're looking for is consistency. George Pickens was a guy back in the day where you started to hear his name making plays in practice. Puglisi is another guy where he comes in and you're going, man, he's made some nice throws. And more than anything, it's good to have that, but you're looking for consistency in their playmaking ability.
I just think that's really good advice. And it's the kind of thing that we should probably play every spring. because there will always be 8 gazillion rumors. But as Jon says, it's the stuff that you hear repeatedly that ends up being the most meaningful. And as he points out, sometimes the sort of repeated whispers, the repeated rumors, sometimes they really do end up being true. That some of the same stuff that eyewitnesses are kind of, confirming over and over again, sometimes it ends up being true. Jon's right. This wouldn't have been a spring practice rumor. It would have been a summer, fall camp rumor because of when he arrived. But Nate Frazier early in fall camp, people who were seeing that were like, oh, my gosh, I really like this Frazier kid. Well, guess what? I thought Nate Frazier had an outstanding freshman season. But the people who said they saw that from him during those fall camp moments, I think the way that Frazier played this year, not a perfect, season, but for the most part, Frazier ended up being one of the really impressive freshmen on this Georgia roster and one of the more important players for Georgia, we believe, in 2025. And people lucky enough to either be at practice themselves or know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who was, they're like, man, I got to tell you, this Frazier kid looks pretty good. And as it turns out, that rumor is 100% true. Let me give you another example that Jon didn't mention. Y'all remember A.D. Mitchell? Look, Mitchell was – people forget this stuff. When Mitchell came to Georgia, he was a total unknown. Not famous really at all, but all throughout spring practice. And back then we weren't really even calling him AD. I believe they're calling him Adonai. Adonai Mitchell, boy, people say, well, he looks good. He could be something else. And then lo and behold, not too far later, he's catching the go-ahead touchdown in a national championship game. And on G-Day, we saw, what had been rumored in spring practice kind of validated. That these rumors that are restated repeatedly oftentimes end up to be true. Not 100% of the time, and not certainly every rumor that we hear ends up being real. But the ones we hear more than once, the ones we hear in various corners from different people kind of echoing through the internet or echoing through your social circle, some of this kind of stuff does sometimes end up being true. And perhaps it's also true of Bo Walker. Maybe. Yesterday, Jon Stinchcomb talked more about him in particular.
For a guy like Bo Walker, I think what's exciting for him is when you don't fit a profile, right? So he's a little bit shorter than most. And there's other guys that have may not fit that profile that you're looking for. When they flash, when they continue to get those opportunities because they're hard-earned, Stetson Bennett is a guy like that, where, statistically you look at him on paper and you're like, I'm not impressed. But yet they're football players. Those get me really excited because they have a hunger that usually comes along with that chip on your shoulder, that they have something to prove, and it makes for some really good football players. So whether it's Bo Walker or anyone else that may not fit that prototype of what this position looks like, those usually offer some pretty fun storylines because there's a chip on your shoulder and a hunger that's unmatched.
So once again, I think that's just sort of wise from kind of ex-player, kind of student of the game standpoint. What Jon's saying there, I think, contains multitudes. You mentioned the Stetson Bennett part of this. So different position, of course, but if you go back to when Bennett was in high school, like Bennett had no shortage of admirers. Like there were a lot of people. Kind of pre-2017 when Bennett was the sort of scout team hero for Georgia. The career of Stetson Bennett's obviously a remarkable one. But, in 2017 when he's the sort of scout team hero leading into the Rose Bowl, there were a lot of people who are like, I tried to tell y'all in high school this guy was playing well. Well, how come a guy like Bennett could be overlooked? Well, there actually is a tangible reason for that. He himself, not very big, as Jon says, doesn't fit the profile, also playing at a smaller Georgia high school. So therefore, you got little quarterback playing a little school, the fact that he's putting up big numbers, the fact that he's got this sort of cocky swagger, all of that could be easily dismissed because he doesn't really look the part. Now, as we were saying about Bo Walker a moment ago, well, actually, there's like a prototype for running back, not super big, maybe not the fastest guy in the world, that actually Walker sort of fits into pretty well based on previous history of college football. But let's just let our mind wander for a moment. This is sort of bigger than just one player. It's sort of a kind of a way in which we kind of evaluate the rumor mill overall. How could it be that Bo Walker was, or has maybe turned out to be, better than some fans thought he would be in the very early days of his Georgia practices. Is there any reasonable explanation for how that could be true? Well, guess what? You can trace it back and say, oh, yeah, you know what? There actually might be a very obvious reason why somebody like this could have been perhaps a little bit overlooked. Keep in mind that Walker, for a while in high school, was at Cedar Grove, which is a perennial power, one of the more stable, consistent year-to-year teams, produce a lot of major college players, just really kind of a easy sort of given in Georgia high school athletics. They had sort of a changeover in coaching staff, kind of created a little bit of a situation where all of a sudden Walker wanted to go somewhere else, kind of got caught into a little bit of a transfer. I don't want to say bureaucracy necessarily, but his transfer that he wanted to make was denied. He had nowhere to go for his senior year. There was a real chance that Bo Walker might not play high school football at all as a senior. He ended up at like Rabun Gap, Naguchi, I think that's how you say it, Nakuchi, or however you say it, which is a little bit of a different kind of school. A lot of the guys there are major college prospects, but some of them are international guys. Age requirements are a little bit different. They play in a very different league. And once Bo Walker ended up way up in the mountains at Rabun Gap, all of a sudden nobody really saw him again. And so for the most part, Walker's senior year took place as a total unknown, completely shielded from almost any, I guess, media. I don't want to say, no media coverage, but a lot less media coverage than he would have gotten if he was playing at a place like Cedar Grove that's going to be on TV and going to be, kind of just sort of more a part of the major high school football coverage here in Georgia. Walker didn't really get that. So how is it that a guy like this could have sort of slipped into Georgia without a whole lot of fanfare and already generating the rumors that he is? And you trace it back to say, oh, I guess that's because really nobody was paying that much attention to him during his senior year. Once it was sort of a transfer issue, people kind of moved on to something else, and then Walker just sort of quietly went about his business. Now he's at Georgia, and the early returns are positive. Now, to kind of put a bow on all of this, no pun intended. Honestly, didn't mean to say that. I am not here to tell you that any rumor you're going to hear about this guy or the other guy or anything else is going to turn out to be true. I'm not here to tell you that. But I'm also not going to apologize for having some fun with some of this kind of stuff too. As a Georgia fan, it is good to hear and fun to hear good things about players in this team, especially players who just arrived. And for a Georgia team that could use a little bit of a spark offensively, if we're being honest, well, that makes it even more fun to hear it. I do think, though, that what Jon Stinchcomb says about how we consume these rumors, how repeated are they? How consistent are they? I think some of the stuff that he's saying there, does it kind of fit the mold of a guy that could have been overlooked? I think some of the advice that John's giving is actually pretty good for how to filter some of this and process some of it. And who knows? Maybe this fall, some of this stuff we're hearing right now, maybe it really will turn out to be true. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Boy, we're great to have you with us. Glad to have you with us here today. Fun show on tap. Getting ready for March Madness. Connor Riley here in a moment on all of this stuff. And, of course, it's video across all platforms. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcasts, wherever you find them. Just super, super, super glad to have you with us. And so thanks to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. Now, you know ServPro by now, especially if you've got cleanup needs, fire damage, water intrusion, things like that. The restoration specialists of ServPro want to do good work for you. And listen, ServPro understands that's serious business. If it's your home that's been damaged, if it's your, warehouse where your business is based out of, if that gets damaged, then you want it fixed right away. But it's also kind of nice in life to sort of step out of the boundaries of work and have a little bit of fun every now and then. And while our friends at ServPro are serious about being restoration specialists, they also enjoy having fun too, and they appreciate their responsibility in being a good steward in the community as well. And coming up in just a couple of weeks, they're going to get a chance to do all of that right here together, and the invitation is to you to be a part of it there as well. You may know that in Athens, there's a professional hockey team now, the Athens Rock Lobsters. Well, our folks from ServPro are going to be sponsoring a First Responders Appreciation Night there with the Athens Rock Lobsters on Friday, March 28th. That's going to be a great night of fun. The entire family is going to be a part of that. I'm bringing my kids. We're going to have a great time, and we're going to do a really cool thing, which is in addition to enjoying some hockey and hanging out with the friends from ServPro, we're going to pay tribute to all the first responders in our community. I'm talking about firefighters and policemen and, school resource officers, EMTs, all the people that are doing so many things. We're going to do all of that. And if you ever take your kids like a touch truck thing or something like that, this is going to be a little bit of that type of deal too, because the Serve Pro Mobile Command Center, which is kind of just a cool thing to be able to see, is going to be out front of the Aikens Ford Arena there that night. So you can come see. I'll be hanging out there. My family's going to be there. We're going to have a great time. And if you want some discounted tickets to this with our friends from the Athens Rock Lobsters, probably the easiest way to do that is to go to the special offers tab at rocklobstershockey.com. Let me give that to you again. The website is rocklobstershockey.com. Rock, think about rock music. Lobsters, think about the crustacean. Athens Rock Lobsters, first responders now with our friends at ServPro. The website is rocklobstershockey.com. Click the special offers tab. You can get some discounted tickets to be a part of the special First Responders Appreciation Night with our friends at ServPro. It's Friday, March 28th. I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's a lot of fun, and I hope to see you there for that. Does that make sense? You may have any questions about that? Hopefully that's all clear. So we can't wait to see you with the Athens Rock Lobsters and ServPro coming up on Friday, March the 28th. Okay, I got Connor Riley coming up in a moment. Tuesdays also typically mean Jake Fromm for us. No Jake today. Jake's going to join us on Thursday show. I'm going to record it with Jake tomorrow to air on Thursday, so that will be a lot of fun. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. Now, in a moment, we're going to get a little bit more into kind of what I think is intriguing about the matchup between Georgia and Gonzaga in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I do believe there is a lot that is coming up. But prior to that, I told you yesterday at the very end of the show, I was incredibly surprised at an email that I got, an incredibly magnanimous email, because a year ago we did a Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge for the NCAA tournament here on our show. And, listen, I had a lot of intentions for things I was going to try to do, and it didn't all work out the way that it wanted it to because I'm a sort of a sloppy, haphazard mess, and we just sort of talked about that. And yet we had a guy, Jeremy, wrote in yesterday, and we showed you on the screen of like, hey, BA, I would love to have another Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. And I said on the air yesterday, gosh, I'm surprised to hear this because, a year ago I had some stuff I was going to try to send out to people. It didn't end up working out. And I thought the last thing that people would want to do was do another one of these Golden Shoe Bracket Challenges, just given what last year's was. Well, guess what? We have now since heard from more Georgia fans, and they are echoing the same sentiment. You have no idea how much this, I just am very moved by all of this. Let me show you a great email from Blair here, who writes in to say, as a past participant in the DawgNation Bracket and Masters Challenge, we did a Masters Challenge last year too. In my books, you are forgiven for any past shenanigans. With that said, I'm also in for another DawgNation Bracket Challenge and or a Masters Challenge too. He says, thanks for a great daily podcast and go Dogs. That's Blair Calhoun who writes in to say that. Now, you have no idea how much this means to me to hear something like that. I just am so moved by that. The fact that people would still want to do this is the fact that they remember it from a year ago. This is not a promotion. There's no money on the line. There's no sponsorship. This is just me doing this as a sort of a goodwill gesture with all of you. But admittedly, I did say, as Blair references, that I was going to try to send some stuff out last year, and it didn't quite work out that way. And around here we try to be fair and balanced. We try to be fair and balanced. I could just pick out all the nice things that people say and just kind of roll with that and make you think I'm, some great guy. There were people, though, that still do have memories of what it was that didn't happen when it comes to last year's Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. I'll show you this from a YouTube commenter, our buddy Mark Morris, who we love. But Mark writes in to say, BA, if you commit to doing something, you need to do it. Those of us who participated in last year's Bracket Challenge are still waiting. Now, what the communication here is that I did say, hey, the winner of the Bracket Challenge, you can come on air and we'll celebrate you as the all-knowing king of college basketball knowledge. But to the other folks, I said, and in fact, to kind of, I guess, sort of prove my point here, Mark says, listen, if you say you're going to do something, you better do it. But as a way of confirming what it was that I said a year ago, I actually went back in time this morning to give you an idea of how I spend my time when I'm not doing the show. I went back and found last year's show exactly a year ago. Exactly a year ago, when we first introduced the Golden Shoe Bracket Contest for 2024. The idea that I overpromised anything that I didn't deliver on, based on what we said a year ago, I don't know that I can necessarily be accused of that. Let me go back in time, March 18th from 2024. This is what I said about the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge at the time. This is me from last year. We're going to do a DawgNation Daily Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. The entirety of this is going to be very, very laid back. This is going to be a haphazard mess because I'm running this myself. But I do think it can be fun. We haven't done this in a few years, and I want you to be a part of this. And if you win, you can come on the show. And I'm going to try to give out a few other prizes there as well. So this is probably the sloppiest bracket challenge of any media company running one. I can promise you that none will be more sloppily executed than this one will be. So listen, that is not doctored audio or anything like that. That is the actual pitch to participate that I gave a year ago. Sloppiest bracket challenge of any media company. It's a haphazard mess. I'm doing this by myself. That's what we said. And I would say that's what we delivered on. The winner did get to come on the air. We celebrated them. I said I was going to try to send some stuff out. And I did try, but I failed. So we have heard from people that said, BA, even after all of that, we still want to do the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge again. Well, guess what? Since people say they want to do that, we will do that. And yet this time, it's going to come with 2 promises. So if you did this a year ago hoping for something you didn't get it, if you would be willing to give us one more chance, here is the promise. If you'd be willing to give us one more chance, we're going to do a Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge again. Now, I'm going to show you this on the screen. For this, here's what we need. We need your name, we need your mailing address, we need your email, we need your phone number. And the reason why we need that is because the winner of the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge will get to come back on DawgNation Daily again to whoever it is to celebrate their success and their victory in the bracket. But in addition to that, for the first 200 people that sign up to be a part of our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, I'm going to send you a Golden Shoe sticker in response to that. I showed these on the screen yesterday. I had these made for last year, and I just didn't get them sent out because, as I told you before, this is not like a corporate deal. This is something I am doing myself. I paid for the stickers myself. I will be paying the postage to mail them back out. This is me doing this on my own. So if you want to be a part of the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, winner can come on the air. First 200 people to sign up will also get a Golden Shoe sticker. I literally can see the stickers. They're right here in front of me. I have them already made. All I have to do is mail them out, and I am more than happy to do that. First 200 people, that's what you'll get. So one more time. I need your name, I need your mailing address, your email, your phone number. If you'll send that to me, brandon.adams@DawgNation.com, I'll send you a link back to the bracket. We'll keep up with this. We'll go round by round, kind of announcing who's doing well and who's kind of in the lead. And then eventually the winner will get a chance to be on the show. And the first 200 people to sign up will get a Golden Shoe sticker courtesy of DawgNation Daily. This is the sort of second chance after a year ago. We're going to do this. It's going to be fun. And in all honesty, I'm mostly just making fun of myself when I say all this. But the fact that several of you did reach out to say, hey, BA, we did this a year ago. Can we please do this again? Like, stuff like that makes me feel really good. So I really appreciate the fact that you want to do that. That's going to be a lot of fun. Now, we're also going to talk more about the actual specifics of Georgia in this tournament. We'll do that with Connor Riley coming up. Prior to that, let me also give a shout out to our friends at the Finish Long Drink, because you're getting ready to watch basketball here this weekend. Boy, Finish Long Drink, great way to enjoy that, or whatever you have going on from a sports standpoint. Of course, the Finish Long Drink, a great choice on that. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. You like those. It's a mixed drink. You basically don't have to mix yourself, whether it's the peach-flavored version, the cranberry, the traditional citrus, that's the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, whichever option you think you're going to love, I promise you will. So go to the website, thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code. You can pick some up. A lot of golf courses, honestly, every golf course I go to, they'll always tell you the Finish Long Drink's one of the best sellers they have, because in this special category of drink, I think it really dominates from a flavor standpoint. So enjoy some Finish Long Drink as you're rolling through a great time of year We love having them a part of our show here today. All right, so glad to have you with us. Going to be a great time. Before we're done, I will get into what I'm a little frustrated with when it comes to the ongoing sort of trickle of bad news as it relates to the future of G-Day and the fact that there probably isn't one. We'll get to all that, but let's keep the fun going now. March Madness, we love it. Dogs are a part of it. Let's talk to Connor Riley about that and some spring practice rumors here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
By the way, we're already getting golden shoe bracket submissions. Love to see that. Love to see that. We're going to have a great time with this. And of all the years to have a golden shoe bracket contest, you got to have one this year because Georgia is back in the NCAA tournament. Connor, we're a football show. You have added some great stuff about football. I promise we need to talk about all of that, especially some of these spring practice rumors because I love those. And that's what we get paid to disseminate. But I do want to talk some bracket stuff just for fun here for a moment because, honestly, as I mentioned this, I think it was yesterday, I grew up loving this. I mean, to me, like some of my best memories, bar none, were like high school, hanging out with friends, trying to find a way to watch tournament games and kind of early days of kind of first filling out brackets. I just loved all this stuff. And so I'm happy to be able to do some of this with you again here. And to be honest with you, I think this Georgia-Gonzaga matchup is really fascinating. Gonzaga is probably underseeded the way that most good mid-majors typically are. Analytics-wise, they're probably, a power-rated top 10 team. However, they are also a team that sometimes in tournament play has trouble with the kind of big-bodied power conference teams. I do think that Georgia has a chance to win this game. I think that Gonzaga has a chance to blow Georgia out if they're not careful. But I do think that Georgia has a chance to win this game. I'll give you one quick point, and then I'll cede the floor. People are going to make a big deal about the fact that, Georgia beat the SEC champion Florida, and Georgia beat the Big East champion St. John's. I would say in addition to that, one of the darling upset picks right now is Grand Canyon over Maryland. That's another conference champion that Georgia's also beaten. There are plenty of people who think that Oklahoma can beat two-time defending national champion UConn. That's also a team that Georgia beat. In other words, I'm not trying to do the transitive property thing, but Georgia didn't just play a tough schedule. At various times throughout the season, Georgia really earned some quality wins. That Gonzaga is a favorite in this game for a reason. It's a much prettier basketball team than Georgia is, much prettier. But Georgia's pretty rugged, and I do think that's a recipe for a pretty fascinating matchup on Thursday afternoon.
And I will go a step further. Look, we know this first-round NCAA tournament game since 2008. They've made 9 straight Sweet 16s. They've played for 2 national championships in the past decade. But this is not, in my estimation, a vintage Gonzaga team. You look at what they did in the non-conference. They lost to Kentucky, a Kentucky team that Georgia went out and outright beat. I think you look at the strengths of this Gonzaga team and what they do well. Their best player is Graham Ike, a very fun player, I think, just for hoops fans in general to watch. But I think Georgia's got the size with Asa Newell, Samta Sorrell, Justin Abson to really make things difficult for Ike. Ryan Nembhard, one of the best point guards in all of college basketball. I'm really fascinated in seeing how Silas Demery meets that challenge of playing against an experienced player in that regard. This is not a vintage Gonzaga team. They lost to St. Mary's twice in the regular season before beating them in the conference tournament. They don't have the quality wins that they've had in years past. And so in that regard, look, Georgia's not going to be afraid of Gonzaga when they go in there. And they understand that the environment with an NCAA tournament is a little bit different. But they've been in big-time games. They've played on the road at Auburn and played them tough. They've gone out. They beat Texas when they had to. They beat South Carolina when they had to. They have wins over NCAA tournament teams. The talent is there. And so we're going to, I think, really learn in this matchup just how important March Madness experience is, because Georgia's got one guy on this team that has it, and that's R.J. Godfrey, whereas this Gonzaga team is sort of bathed in it. So I'll be interested in seeing just how the moment affects both of these teams. But Georgia is absolutely talented enough to win this first-round game and beat a Gonzaga team that is not the same vintage as some of Mark Few's past teams.
And with all due respect to Silas Demery and Blue Kane, I believe you mentioned the 3 most important players in this game, Surreal and Abson and certainly Asa Newell. Sometimes the sort of sports talky embrace debate point I think really is true. And in this particular case, I just think it's been borne out over years that the West Coast Conference, even though St. Mary's is in there and sometimes San Francisco's okay, The West Coast Conference just does not prepare Gonzaga very well for the NCAA tournament. They are like number one in KenPom every year to the point they break the scale. Their analytics are so high. And while they're in the Sweet 16 every year, they've only advanced the Final Four twice, despite the fact that they are like top 5 in everything all the time. And I just think that there is no, Asa Newell in the West Coast Conference. There is no, Abson and Santos Real. Like that sort of size sort of exists in the SEC in the way that it doesn't exist in the West Coast Conference. And that is Georgia's chance of winning this game. Gonzaga's favored for a reason, but Georgia could win.
I love that you're poo-pooing 9 straight Sweet 16s and 2 Final Fours as if there aren't Georgia basketball fans that would kill to have that kind of resume over the past decade. But again, this is not the same Gonzaga team. And I think even that showed up in West Coast Conference play this year and the way that they played. And even the way they beat St. Mary's in the West Coast Conference tournament. That was a very low-scoring game. They had to win with their defense.
It's a good game. I actually watched that. It's a good game.
I think that style of play and the way that Gonzaga had to play plays into Georgia's strength. You look at the teams that gave Georgia the most trouble during this season: Florida, Alabama, teams that can, even a Marquette team that I think is a 7 seed in this tournament, teams that can really shoot and can really move and go on offense. I don't think that this Gonzaga team is that, especially against top tier teams. And so with Georgia, look, they're not going to have, Georgia's going to have better athletes on the floor. And so I think that in this game, what does Silas Demery do? I know we talk a lot about Asa Newell, and you're a big fan of his, and we talked a little bit earlier about Blue Kane and RJ Godfrey. If Georgia's going to win, I think Silas Demery needs to be the best player in this game. He has the ability to do so. We've seen him do that at times, I think, especially over the month of February. But you look at the way they lost to Oklahoma. He gets into foul trouble in the second half of that game, and I think that really took Georgia out of it a little bit. If Silas Demery is going to take the next step from being a very good SEC player to being one of the better guards in college basketball, which I think he's shown the ability to do so, doing it in the first round of this NCAA tournament would be a great showing for him to do so.
So before we move on to football, give me one more NCAA tournament take that's sort of bouncing around your brain here. From anything else stand out to you about the event?
I'm all in on St. John's. I know that SEC, there's a lot of excitement about 14 teams in there, and I'm kind of sort of starting to rethink my own bracket of maybe I should just have SEC teams advancing farther based on what we saw in non-conference play. But, Auburn's not playing well of late. Alabama's a little bit of a mess, especially with Grant Nelson dealing with an injury. Everyone in the world seems to be on Florida right now, which is telling me I got to get off of them and go with somebody else. And so you're looking at teams. I don't want to support Duke. I don't like them. I don't care for them. Houston, I think how you feel about Gonzaga, I feel about Houston in that regard, who Georgia could very likely end up playing in the second round should they win. So give me St. John's. Ironically, a team that Georgia beat this season. They play great defense. I love Rick Pitino and what he does for the game, good, bad, or ugly. And so if I'm hitching a team to my wagon this spring, I'm going with St. John's.
That's awesome. Really good stuff. We'll talk more tournament later on in the show. Let me move on to football. We started today by talking about some of your practice observations, and a name that you mentioned that has been, I would say, as somebody who kind of, lives in the rumor mill, among the most discussed, certainly Georgia newcomers so far during spring practice, that's the running back Bo Walker. What we said was we'll never know if the rumors turn out to be true or not, and how much of that actually pays dividends in the fall. Some of that can't be known, and frankly, in a roundabout way, I sort of don't care if they're true or not. I just sort of like the fact that rumors exist, whether they end up being true or not. I just enjoy it, and we're here to have fun. But the idea that somebody like Walker, who was not really observed very closely during his senior year because kind of getting caught up in sort of the transfer thing, ending up at a school that does not get as much local attention as it maybe gets sometimes national attention, that Walker just kind of went overlooked during his senior year. So if someone did kind of arrive at Georgia under the cover of darkness, not quite fully known as a commodity, someone like Walker would have at least a chance of being that. And listen, whether this is true or not, Georgia needs a breakout star on offense somewhere, so why not an incoming freshman running back? What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, it was interesting getting out there to watch, and I had been told to keep an eye out for Walker based on how he had impressed in off-season workouts, and you get out there and you see Isaiah Gibson, who's 10 feet tall and as strong as an ox. And you see Elijah Griffin, who is built as a freshman defensive lineman, has rarely been built. You look on the offensive side of the ball, even Talon Taylor, I think he's a guy that's bigger than maybe some people will anticipate him seeing. And then obviously you have guys like Elias Williams, Ethan Barbour, who we've already talked about on the show this offseason. Bo Walker doesn't stand out in that regard. He's a compact, well-built athlete, bigger than Trevor Etienne, but he's also not in that Roderick Robinson, Branson Robinson type mold where he's so big that they sort of look like bowling balls. But everything we continue to hear about Bo Walker, and again, it's early. They've had one padded practice to this point. Running back is just a position where sometimes it's hard to quantify. Sometimes there are elite athletes that do it really well. Other times they're just guys who are naturally great at the position. And I think Walker falls into that latter camp. I don't want to compare him to Deion Edwards because, again, they're not built the same. Deion was much more, I think, sturdy. But, again, that came over the course of his career. But Deion was a guy not highly touted coming out of Colquitt County down there. There were bigger name running backs in that 2020 cycle that we all talked about, Zach Evans, Tank Bigsby. And Deion Edwards went on to have a better career, in my estimation, than Tank Bigsby did at Auburn, than Zach Evans did at Ole Miss and at TCU. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar out of Bo Walker in his time at Georgia, just because he's a guy that does all the little things well. I'm not comparing him to Ezekiel Elliott because he was obviously an incredible college running back. But he's got sort of that similar with what I hear about him, how he just does everything well. He pass blocks, he catches well. Again, not the best athlete in the world. He's not going to win a 40-yard dash, but he's a guy who does everything well. And I think for a Georgia running back room that is super banged up right now, that makes his skill set very, very valuable.
I think it's really interesting. And look, I just think that Georgia right now needs something like this. Not because it's a bad football team or it's not a dire straight type situation, but it'd just be fun, whether it's Elijah Griffin on defense or Bo Walker coming in at running back or Talon Taylor or people talk about Juan Gaston as kind of a interesting competitor to this offensive line competition. I just think Georgia needs a little spice right now, something to just sort of stir the pot a little bit. And so if it's not Walker, hopefully it's somebody else, or maybe it's a combination of a few things, but I just think every now and then you just need a little bit of an emotional energy reboot. And, sometimes fresh blood on the practice field gives you a chance to have some of that. So I'm always willing to be, both optimistic and skeptical about anything that comes out because I say all the time, sometimes, good news breaks out, bad news never does. So, making sense of what's actually going on behind closed doors is always going to be a little bit of a tricky proposition. But if there was ever a Georgia program in a moment for a team where they could benefit from some sort of, exciting new blood, I would say going into 2025 is certainly an example of that.
You say Georgia needs more spice on offense. I'm going to say Georgia maybe needs some sugar on that side of the ball. I think some positive energy, some positive moments, some positive plays, just given all the negativity that has, I think, persisted around this offense this past offseason. Even, I know you touched on this yesterday, the sort of Ryan Puglisi debate and the way that I think, based on Kirby's comments he made on 92.9 The Game last Thursday, sort of turned and percolated over the weekend there. So seeing guys like Bo Walker come out and have positive springs. And Bo Walker's not the only one that you've heard good things about. Talon Taylor has impressed very quickly on. Landon Roldan, who I would point out, he's 100% leaning into the Ladd McConkey comparisons. To see him out there in the 84 jersey, I'm like, all right, he well knows the shoes that he is stepping into there. So I think some positive energy, some good notes from this offense this spring, I think would be much welcome, just given all the discussion, all the talking points, all the Mike Bobo-ness, Stacey Searles, whatever you want to say about it. I think some positive moments from this offense this spring would be much needed going into a pivotal 2025 year.
All right, so along those lines, what else have we learned from spring practice so far?
This team, go ahead.
No, I just said, so what have we learned from spring practice so far?
This team's really young in the defensive front, and they've got bodies, and I'm intrigued by what Isaiah Gibson can possibly do. I think everyone is waiting to see just how Elijah Griffin goes living up to the hype. But they're, looking at the outside linebacker position, you've got Quintavious Johnson there as a sophomore. He's the most established player. They've got 3 freshmen, and then they move Chris Jones over there. On the defensive line, Warren Brinson, Nan Stackhouse, Michael Williams, Tyrion Ingham-Dawkins. You got used to seeing them there at those positions, hitting the sled for so long. And now you're seeing guys like Joseph Jonah Ajonye in his second year, sort of near the front of the line there. And again, it's not something that is, I think, going to overall be a detriment. And look, there are a lot of college football teams out there that would see what Georgia has along the line of scrimmage with this team and absolutely sign up with it. But this team's really young. And so those early games against Marshall, against Austin Peay, I think it's critical that those guys get as many reps and as many snaps as they can, because the next 2 games in September at Tennessee and home against Alabama, they're going to need to play really well, really quickly. And so that's something where, again, you lose a ton of snaps there. And look, they have talent. Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod, Christian Miller, who's obviously the most experienced defensive lineman, and he's not with the team this spring as he recovers from a labrum injury. So I just think that this team, and this is what stood out to me when I was just walking up and down the practice field, this team's super young on that defensive front. And it is something that early on in the season, those first couple games at Tennessee, home against Alabama, at Auburn in that sort of middle of the season, in middle of October, those games are going to be really worth watching to see what they're able to get out of these, because these guys just, quite frankly, haven't played a significant amount of winning football to this point.
All right, in the last couple of minutes we have, I made a promise at the beginning of the show. I was not going to make the whole show about this because I've been beating this drum all spring long. It's gotten to the point where I've sort of said everything that I can say about this. But we did learn yesterday, I guess Mark Weiser, Athens Banner-Herald, first to report this, that Georgia will not have any TV coverage for G-Day this year after being like streaming video, things like that. In the past last year, no TV coverage at all for G-Day here this year. 2 points for me. I'm going to say more about this at the end of the show, but 2 points for me, and then I want to give you a chance to talk about this. Thing number one is Georgia is slow playing bad news on this, and they're getting away with it. They are, in a very ambiguous fashion, setting people up not to have a G-Day at all. And when it does happen, people are going to be looking around, what happened to G-Day? This is classic, the first headline is, G-Day, and, that gets some positive attention. Then Kirby Smart follows that up with sort of an ambiguous statement of, well, are we having G-Day or not? And now it's, well, there's no TV coverage. Georgia, one of only 3 SEC teams not to have any, I believe anyway, any TV coverage. And now I believe, now my predictions sometimes are wrong, but I believe the next step is, well, since it's not on TV, we might as well not even have it at all. And I think there's a really good chance to come April or whatever that they're not doing anything, and they will never do it again. And to be honest, and these are my friends, and I mean this, I don't think the media is covering this story particularly well. I think this impacts fans more so than it impacts media types. I think media types, some of which, and I get this, some of them look at it as just one fewer day to work. And I just think this impacts the media in a very different way than it impacts the fans. And I don't think from a fan perspective this story is getting proper coverage. Georgia is taking something away from the fans, and there's not a lot of scrutiny of this decision here right now. That's my opinion. What do you think?
I'm going to lean into you with this in this regard, because it's very interesting to me. I'll be in Wichita tomorrow because Georgia's got a basketball availability. There will be several Georgia media members there covering that. Georgia is having a practice availability, a post-practice availability tonight when not most, but a number of those Georgia media types will not be there to ask Kirby Smart what exactly is going on with this spring game and with G-Day and why they made the decision that they did to not televise this. And to me, that is at least somewhat telling in that regard. There is a part of me that maybe wonders and is willing to give the benefit of the doubt here, maybe wrongly so, that in not televising it, that they are trying to make it, a better, I think, in-game or in-stadium experience in terms of, hey, it's not on TV, come and be in person. Make this a special, sort of special in-person only kind of show, and make G-Day, somewhat closer to an actual game, because I think a lot of people do enjoy watching this from the comfort of their own couch. That is the, rose-colored glasses look through it. The pessimistic, someone who has covered this program for a long time now and knows Kirby and knows how he views and treats things, they're going to try and make this as shut down, as private as they possibly can. I was talking with people over the weekend. I wouldn't be surprised if they move to a world where it's like a boosters only type of event, somewhat like they do some of the fall scrimmages there. And I got to say, again, you've got a lot of fans that, yes, there are ones that'll pay just blindly and give into that. But I talk to people and ask them about this, and they're becoming more and more alienated from the game of college football by the day. And it's very concerning. And look, spring games in general, G-Day, it is a fan-driven event. It is something for the fans. It is especially, I think, something for younger fans. And so if you're doing away with it, one, just have the gumption to come out and say this. Stop, slow playing it, dragging this out, creating false hope. At least say it with your chest. Look, we've been very critical of Matt Rule in this regard. At least he had the gumption to come out and actually say how he felt about the matter. I'll give him credit in that regard, even if I disagree with it. With the way that Georgia has gone about handling this, where they say they're going to have it with Josh Brooks, when we first asked him at the end of February, they let it be known that they're planning on doing something. And every step since then, and even then they had sort of maybe dragged out this idea that they were going to have it. Every step since then has been indicating that they intend on walking this back in some way. Look, I hope I'm wrong and they do sort of a fan day. And, I think they do what LSU's doing, where they do an open practice for fans in Sanford Stadium, and then after the day, they do an autograph session, because I do think that is something that fans have said they would like to see come back. They used to do that at Mark Richt days. They used to do that in the early days of Kirby Smart as well, if I recall correctly. So I think that this is just something where, look, if you want to be secretive and you want to take things away from fans, that's fine. Come out and actually say that, because what has transpired since then has only made this situation more fraught. And it, again, I think speaks to this idea that the powers that be in college football care less and less about the common fan, the average fan, and are willing to just say, hey, whoever's willing to give us money, we'll make special accommodations for. But if you're not willing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars, especially this coming in a year where Georgia is raising ticket prices, is very concerning.
Yeah, I think that all that's really true. And I'm going to say one more thing, and then we'll let you go. You got two issues going on here for me. The one issue is the spring game deterioration across college football, and it could be like a lot of things that there's just very little that could be done about that. It's just sort of another thing that's being taken from fans, from the sport overall, and I guess we're just powerless to stop it. We're just going to stand here and watch college football be destroyed, I reckon. I guess we're just powerless to stop all that. But separate from that, because if nobody else has a spring game either, then Georgia probably won't have one too. I do get that, although some people still are. But also here at Georgia, if I'm being honest, and Connor, you know how big of a Georgia football fan that I am, the idea that Georgia would do, you reference LSU, have an open practice and you can come get autographs after that, the idea that Georgia would do something like that, given the fact that, if I'm being honest, and I love Georgia, and I love Kirby in particular, but the idea that Georgia would do something like that when they don't do anything like that is, I think that's probably a pipe dream. I'd love for Kirby to prove me wrong and make an announcement today, hey, we're going to take care of our fans. We're going to do something fun for fans. They don't do anything like that. The honest truth is, when it comes to like fan engagement events, even in comparison to like, say, Alabama and programs like that, Georgia probably offers the least fan engagement of any team in college football. And it's because they're so popular. I do get that. But when you think about like fan days and like caravans across the state, autograph opportunities, things like that, Georgia probably does less of that than any program in America. And separate from whatever the future of spring games are, that's a thing to think about of, are you winning enough that you don't have to do any fan outreach whatsoever? I think that's a fair question.
The price of winning championships. And I think that those two titles that Kirby won have emboldened him, and they have given him the ability to say, hey, yeah, we don't need to do those caravans anymore. I don't need to go to Columbus one night, making the next Brunswick one after that, go down to Savannah, go up to Augusta, go up to Rome, wherever, and do those sorts of things. But I will say this, look, you're in this every day. You're in the trenches. You're seeing it, just how negative and how, the team has been talked about this offseason. If Georgia's more transparent, and look, you can rightly point out that this is a media member saying this, and his job would 100% be easier if Georgia was more transparent and more open about these things. I 100% acknowledge that. But I do wonder if Georgia is more fan-friendly, if they are a little bit more open, does that change the way that this team is seen? Does it change the way that this team is viewed? And if people maybe get the chance to see a little bit more of their quarterback, a little bit more of the big players on this team, does that help at all, the tone and tenor around this team? Because it absolutely was very negative during the stretch run of last season and has continued into this offseason. And again, if they're going to lose 2-3 games every year, like I think they're going to now, just because that's the way college football is, and you're not reaching out to your fan base and your constituents and you're making them feel valued and making them feel heard and seen, you risk really further alienating that. And I'm just curious as to what this is going to look like if, they continue to have more seasons like they did in 2024 rather than they did in 2021 or 2022.
Yeah, so I was going to say this later in the show, but since you brought it up, I'll say it now. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Whereas, I believe that if you're a fan, you have a right to ask more from Georgia in terms of fan outreach. I just think you have a right to ask for that. However, the opposite's also true. If you're a fan, if you say, listen, I don't care about G-Day, and I don't care about Picture Day, I don't care, I just want you to win, I think you have a right to say that as well. But the problem with that is, and this is just a fact, the problem with is, hey, don't worry about all this other stuff, just win. The unspoken subclause to that contract is, that means win in perpetuity. And the moment you lose even one game, all of a sudden some fans going to be like, this is not the deal we had. You're supposed to win. Win means never lose. And what happens is when Georgia even loses a couple of games, all of a sudden now there's this, I would say, fairly extraordinary level of tension, so much so that Kirby Smart's asked about, Mike Bobo and Stacey Searles, things like that, in his opening press conference, because the fact that so much about Georgia football has frankly been commoditized. The fan engagement is simply a matter of how much money can you give us. The program looks back and says, hey, we're giving you a winner, so therefore you're going to need to put up with some stuff, from us. And I do, and listen, you cannot be more of a Georgia homer than I am. You can't. It is physically impossible to love Georgia football more than I do. But I also have eyes and I have a brain. And what I'm telling you right now is that there is a commoditized relationship between the Georgia football program and its most ardent supporters that doesn't lead somewhere positive if somebody doesn't do something to make this be a little more touchy-feely. Just going to put it out there. That's what needs to happen.
And I'm going to be interested moving forward because I'll tell you this, Kirby Smart's not changing. Kirby Smart is, like all football coaches, Kirby Smart is stubborn. And he's not going to bend. He's not going to, try and react that way to it. He knows what he signed up for, and he believes that doing things this way, where it allows him to focus the most on football and do that, is going to win Georgia the most games. And to your point, look, there are people out there that just want Georgia to win. But let's sit here and call it what it is. There were a lot of people that were very disappointed about how last season went. And Georgia went 11-3, and they won an SEC championship. And maybe that is just a very vocal minority in that regard. But last season was not exactly a lot of fun. And so when you react and you act the way that you do, especially I think in terms of the common fan, you open yourself up to a lot of criticism, a lot of negativity, and that only builds pressure that is felt not just by Kirby Smart, but I believe by these athletes, by these players for Georgia as well. And I'm very interested in seeing what that looks like moving forward.
Connor, great stuff. We'll look forward to reading plenty from you at DawgNation.com. As you said, you're also on your way to Wichita. We'll look forward to some interesting coverage of Georgia basketball. Man, it'd be so much fun to have this team playing in the first weekend of this deal. Now, I think that Houston's better than you do, so I don't really quite know what would be awaiting the Dogs if the Cougars are looming. But, man, it'd be fun to find out, though. Good stuff. Can't wait to enjoy all of that. We'll see you soon back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
Yep, as always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so my promise to you at the beginning of the show was we're not going to make the whole show about the whole G-Day thing. I'm going to say one more thing about it before we're done. But I do think that I do think this is one of those things that shouldn't go unnoticed. And as I said before, fans are well when they're if you want to demand more fan engagement from Georgia, I think you have a right to do that compared to the way the other college football programs, some of them, operate. If you're a fan that says, hey, listen, all I care about is winning, I think that you have a right to sort of be okay with that too. But that's not necessarily a perfect contract because, as we've seen this offseason, even one loss in the eyes of some becomes, breaking, sort of an example of breaking that contract. It would certainly seem to be that anyway. All right, we'll do one more thing on this before we're done. We'll keep it fun for now, though. Let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. DawgNation cruise coming up. I've heard from so many people last couple of, that we're coming up on spring break time of year, and I just love nothing more when those who have big spring break travel coming up, when they say, hey, listen, got that Royal Caribbean cruise vacation book, going to be on Utopia of the Seas, something like that. What an awesome thing that is. And I love the fact that for me, living here in the Atlanta area, Port Canaveral, the easiest port to drive to. It's super convenient. Everything about Royal Caribbean is about that convenience. How can they get you, as they like to say, from car to bar, get you, at the port, get you through the line, get you on the ship, get you having a good time. And when it's, heading right down the road to Port Canaveral, just a great way to do all of that. I'm telling you, if you want your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, maybe a little late here from a spring break standpoint to think about that. But how about, sometime in 2025, Jessica Slater, a great travel agent, she can tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll give you everything you need on all of that. So let me give you a couple of March Madness thoughts here just for a moment, because we do love the event. As I said before, I think that Gonzaga is a favorite over Georgia for a reason, but for all the stuff we were talking about with Connor, I also think that Georgia would have a chance to pull that upset, and we'll obviously be watching for that. As far as the rest of the SEC goes, I think the one thing I'm going to be just a little bit contrarian on is obviously Auburn is the number one overall seed for a reason. I've told you before, I'm not backing away from this. I am picking Auburn to win the national championship. As far as the next SEC team that I would see advancing the furthest in this event, for me, right now you see a lot of love for Florida because of what they have done, and obviously winning the SEC in this tournament and this year is certainly a tremendous accomplishment. But I'm going to be skeptical of a coach in Todd Golden who hasn't done that before. Now, maybe Golden eventually goes on to be one of the top coaches in the sport. Certainly the success this year would suggest that as a very realistic possibility. But that hasn't happened yet, and this is a sport where the veteran coaches just seem to have more success. So a little bit of skepticism from me about Florida on that, no matter how dominant the team's been this season. The other SEC team that I'm watching a little bit more closely right now, may surprise you somewhat, is actually the team that Florida beat in the NCAA tournament, the SEC tournament final, and that's Tennessee. Quietly, as of late, Tennessee is becoming a little bit better offensive team. They've been a great defensive team all year long. They are putting the ball in the hoop a little better, a little bit more efficiently as of late. So if you're looking for, I would say, in my mind, behind Auburn, the second SEC team most likely to advance deep into this tournament, for me, that would be at Tennessee. That's the team that I'll have my eye on. When it comes to St. John's and some of those teams that Connor mentioned, I'm going to be a little skeptical of them. I'll be a little skeptical of Michigan State. Some of these teams that have had great seasons, but there's a little bit of a correlation historically between kind of where you're seated and kind of where you were ranked preseason, top 25, and we don't often see these unranked preseason teams that go on to have great seasons and therefore earn a great seed. We don't often see them advancing super far in the NCAA tournament. It's one of those weird things where kind of like the preseason AP top 25 football can be somewhat predictive. The basketball can kind of sometimes work out the same way. So be skeptical of a Michigan State on that front. Be skeptical of a St. John's there on that front. Also, one more thing to keep in mind. I thought this was amazing. We haven't seen a team from the Mountain Time Zone or the Pacific Time Zone win a championship since Arizona like a million years ago. Isn't that interesting? It seems like we also have a little bit of an issue that when it comes to college football too, where this has just not really been a West Coast sport in college football. Perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not. Some of those same issues kind of popping up in college basketball as well. In other words, the real demand from the media partners right now is for college athletics to be a national entity. It can't just be the Deep South. They want it to be nationwide. And so I think in the rush to do that, we've had the wrong fixation. I think that there has been a thumb put on the scale, especially in football, to kind of diminish the SEC's stranglehold over the sport. But what actually needs to happen is to look out west to the former Pac-12, the westernmost members of the Big 12 now, and say, hey, can you guys step up your game? Can you be a little more competitive? Can you take this stuff as seriously as the others do? Because to me, it seems like the former Pac-12 schools and a lot of the sort of western portion of our country, boy, they are certainly there to take the checks. And they are certainly there to cast the votes for the future of the college football playoff and make the demands about what it needs to be and what it not. When it comes to the day-to-day operations, these are just unserious people, unserious about college athletics, and the lack of success in both of the major revenue sports, that can't be that much of a coincidence. Perhaps something to think about. Very quickly here, a couple of other things. Azeez Ojulari, you may have seen this. Is not necessarily this is more NFL related, but interesting. With the New York Giants now on his way to the Philadelphia Eagles, so it certainly appears that Howie Roseman has got himself another Philly Dawg here. And I mentioned this briefly because I do love this. I think that's awesome. But also because when you kind of think about it, we're coming up on 10 years of Kirby Smart at Georgia. All of a sudden now that's a pretty large, list of players that have been through the program. I think you can make a case because it was pandemic year and people forget it, and also because of what Georgia did defensively in the years after that. There's a chance that Azeez Ojulari is the most underrated player in the Kirby Smart era. I think there's a chance. From a single season stat standpoint, he was about as dominant as anybody. Now, a lot of it also came in that bowl game against Cincinnati, but even still, that was a top 10 Cincinnati team. And Azeez had an amazing game to kind of close out his Georgia career. I think when we start, because I'm sure in the very near future, you're going to see, hey, the best players of the Smart era, stuff like that. All of a sudden, those lists start getting a little longer. More and more players have come through here. And obviously, a lot of what we think of as the Smart era will be kind of the national championship era for this program, 2021 and 2022 so far. But boy, Azeez, from a pass rush standpoint, what a player he was, and now gets a chance to go be a Philly Dawg there with the Eagles. I think that's a cool thing to see. Speaking of spring games, so I guess Deion Sanders is one of the few programs that's going to have I guess major television coverage for a spring game here. And Deion has said that he'd be interested in having somebody else kind of come in there and do some work with them and maybe have a competitive spring game. And like Fran Brown from Syracuse now says, yeah, we'll do that with you. I'm guessing this probably doesn't go anywhere. This probably doesn't happen. But, man, in light of some of the stuff that we're talking about, I do love the fact that young, hungry coaches are like, yeah, let's do something. Let's do something interesting. Let's cultivate some interest here. And I'll also say this, that in the discussion about kind of the future of spring games and why there will be so few of those moving forward, in a roundabout way, I do sort of blame ESPN for this just a bit. That if ESPN wanted Syracuse and Colorado to play, it could happen tomorrow. But it sort of seems like ESPN kind of doesn't want that. And I think one of the really interesting, although perhaps somewhat difficult to discuss things right now is like, how would the sports world be different if ESPN didn't exist? In other words, if somebody else was the major right holder and if somebody else not ESPN was making decisions for sports, how would things seem to be different? Because ESPN certainly seems, I would say, to make some curious decisions. We see the NFL treated as a 365-day-a-year sport. There's, big deal about schedule release. There's a big deal, obviously, about the draft. Free agency gets, sort of what they call shoulder programming, the sort of non-live event stuff. A lot of attention being given to free agency, and throughout the year we see that. I would say from a traditional old-school media standpoint, college football is fertile soil for the same sort of thing. In fact, shows like ours have made a living doing this for college football. And if we can do this for one team, the Georgia Bulldogs, of course ESPN can do this for the entirety of the sport. But it sort of seems like they don't want to. It sort of seems like, given the chance to televise these spring games, they really haven't made that big of a deal about it. Frankly, the level of broadcast quality that they've given to the spring games in the past is pretty bad, I would say. Nowhere near as, commensurate with the actual attention that these things could get. But ESPN doesn't seem all that intent on covering college football in the spring. I think they could do a better job of that. Same type of deal with I believe that college ball is the second most popular sport in America. I believe the second most popular professional sport's Major League Baseball. And ESPN just decided we don't want to be in the MLB business anymore. We're going to choose this other sport or these other sports, despite the fact that they are less popular than Major League Baseball. So clearly something other than market forces is driving the ESPN decisions here. because if it was sheer market forces, you'd be choosing the most popular sports over less popular sports. So when you start thinking about the demise of the spring games and who's to blame and whether or not it's, worth getting hot and bothered over, the somewhat tepid response from ESPN of having this inventory in the spring, or just making as big of a deal about college football in the non-college football time of the year, or at least what others would think of as the non-college ball time of the year. I think that's got to be a part of the story. That ESPN could have done a lot more with spring football, could have made it more of a real entity, and for whatever reason they've chosen not to. And I don't think the actual market forces have been what's driving that decision based on some of the other choices that ESPN has made. But we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And to just sort of give you like one more final thought on the GDA thing, Connor and I did a lot on that. We won't do a ton more on that. But just to reiterate kind of one more thing. As I said, if you're a fan and you want to demand more from Georgia, whether you get it or not, from a fan outreach standpoint, I think you got a right to do that. I do. I think almost every program in America does a little more in the way of fan outreach than Georgia does. And maybe this spring they'll come through. And if they do, I'm more than happy to give them credit for that. In fact, I think we do a pretty good job around that kind of stuff. Like if you look at the way in which, the basketball stuff played out this year, where as an exchange for the students not rushing the floor, they had all these giveaways, they're pumping the money into the program. I'm talking about for the fan engagement, the stuff they're giving away to the students. That's awesome. That is so good. That is an idea of the sort of customer-friendly service that they've been able to provide for the basketball team. Baseball. My family, we're big fans of Georgia baseball. You go to these Sunday home games, run the bases. The players are talking to the kids. My son, loves all these guys. They have been so nice to him throughout, like the unbelievable level of fan outreach that happens there. Obviously, it goes without saying that the football team, can't do as much of that because of the sheer popularity of it. And fact is, just doesn't really feel like it needs to, once again, because of the sheer popularity of it all. That all makes sense. But there is a byproduct to that. Like there is an unintended consequence to some of that sort of stuff, which is, hey, if you're not conjuring goodwill, like, which doctors get sued? It's not necessarily the worst doctors. It's the doctors with the worst bedside manner. There's been plenty of research about that when you conjure goodwill over time, all of a sudden there's just a little bit of a better vibe when you need it. And eventually every entity kind of needs some of that. And I only say all of this because I just get a chance to see a lot of what Georgia fans say. And there is a little bit of a simmering tension about the fact that, McGill Society gets this and the Silver Circle gets that and, all these people get that. And listen, you need big-time donors. Listen, the big-time donors, kind of pay the freight for the entire program. All of us who are not, rich enough, we all benefit from the big-time donors around Georgia football. They are the ones that sort of fund the feast for the whole deal here. But when all of the stuff seems so sometimes catering towards those big donors, it just creates a certain level of tension. I would say it's simmering. I would say it's low grade. I don't think it's white hot, but there's a little bit of a simmering tension around some of that here right now. And look, Georgia won the SEC this year, beat Texas twice. That's no small accomplishment. I think the overall mood probably doesn't reflect how good of a season Georgia actually had. I believe that Georgia had a better season this year than the prevailing mood sort of reflects, I think. And so when the fan mood doesn't properly match the actual results, I think it's important to ask questions about why that is. And those questions are not necessarily rhetorical and worth exploring in what I believe is an immediate future and certainly a long-term future where another thing that some fans have enjoyed appears on the verge of being taken away. Before we get ready to go, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Daytona Beach. I tell you, grew up going to Daytona Beach, loved 23 miles of shoreline, love the fact that you can fly right to it, love the fact that you can take advantage of so many fun things going on. You like the surfing. It's kind of like the surfing capital of the Atlantic coast in many ways. You like golf. Listen, all kinds of high-quality golf courses. You like, kayaking and outdoor activities, fishing, of course. So much of that stuff also available when it comes to Daytona Beach. Great restaurants and really nice deals on accommodations right now, too. In fact, if you go to DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals, you can learn more about that. That is DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals to learn more about that today. So as we talked about a little earlier, the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge is back for 2025. We've already got submissions rolling in. I hear those kind of dinging on my phone as we're doing the show here right now. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. So here's what we're doing. And this year, unlike a year ago when we got some grief, this year we're actually making two promises. Winner of the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge gets to come on the show. First 200 people to sign up, I'm going to send you a Golden Shoe sticker in the mail, just as a token. I'm not telling you that's worth anything. I'm just saying it's a small token just of my appreciation. So if you'll send me your name, your mailing address, your email, and your phone number to brandon.adams@DawgNation.com, brandon.adams@DawgNation.com. I'll send you back a link to our bracket challenge. We'll get you in there. We'll get you a part of that. And we'll have a good time enjoying March Madness. I'm so excited about it. Can't wait for the Dogs to be a part of this. That's a lot of fun. Also, lousy, stinking Gators and our Gator hater updater. How about 1,592 days? That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. We love that. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Serpro. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Really, really good stuff from our friends at R.S. Sanders. Of course, happy to have them as a part of what we do here right now. Let's take a few comments, and we'll kind of bounce here. So apparently we've had a little bit of an audio issue on YouTube today. I don't know if it's just YouTube. Okay, but it seems like it's a lot of people having it, though. It seems like it's a lot of people that are having it. I don't quite know why that is. Unless it's not as many people as I think it is. Maybe it's just one person. I don't know. All right, let's see what else. Brad H. says, if you want more NIL funds, less fan service isn't how you do it. I think to a certain extent that's true, but it's also one of those things of, if you're trying to raise a large sum of money, this is true for like your church, and for politics, and for NIL. Anytime you're trying to raise a large sum of money through donations, it is very, very hard to raise large sums of money on the back of small donations alone. It just is. It just is. That if you're trying to do something in the millions of dollars, you got to have the big donor. It's like a Pareto's Law 80-20 thing. You know, 20% of your actions will produce 80% of your results. Kind of the same thing from a money standpoint, if not even more than that. About 90% of Georgia's money probably comes from about 10% of its donors, if you had to guess, because, and I don't know that for a fact, that's just the way that most large organizations work that depend on donations. About 10 to 20% of the donors are going to be paying 80 to 90% of the money. And obviously, good business is providing service to, though this is in defense of Georgia, good business is providing service to those 10 to 20% of the people because that's the lion's share of the money. But fan outreach, I would say, still matters even in light of that. And to me, the perfect example of this is the Masters. Like, think about Augusta National and the Masters. First of all, like, I know some pretty rich people. I don't know, at least personally. I guess a couple of degrees of separation removed from, but I don't know anybody personally who's a member of Augusta National, nor do I guess I probably ever will. Like I said, I know of some people who are members, but I don't know them actually personally myself. So forget being a member of Augusta National. Even the people who have the Masters badges, which is a little bit of a less, what do you call it, like a lucrative or prestigious. That's where a little bit of a less prestigious group. There are a lot of normal people that have Masters badges, but even that's a pretty small group of people. The Masters also only has like a small number of sponsors. It's like Cadillac and IBM. It's like, you can say like the same people that have been with them for 8 million years. So the Masters business is essentially done. Like, they've only got they've only got a small number of patrons. They only got a small number of sponsors. They've been on CBS for 8 million years. They'll be on CBS as long as there is a CBS. Like the Masters from a business standpoint is just done. They have no business to do. Their business is already taken care of. And yet, even with that, they have the single best app in all of sports. There is not a sports app anywhere that functions like the Masters app. It is, even for a relatively, technology challenged person like me, their app is a thing of beauty. And all of the online coverage they get of like Amen Corner, like you can just watch so much stuff online. The condensed shot, sort of recaps they provide. Like they have no business reason to do this. It's just fan outreach. Same thing with like the Augusta, with the women's amateur, the ANWA, and the Latin American tournament they do. Like some of that kind of stuff. Like there's no business, as they like to say in the VBR, there's no VBR, valid business reason for doing that kind of stuff. They just do it for outreach. That even successful organizations that have no need for any additional fans or even any additional sponsorship, they have no need for it. Outreach is still a good idea even for them. Let's see what else. All right, let's see what else is going on. G. Grace on the subject of the Carolina Panthers, obviously his guy, Bryce Young is there. So I've always kind of liked Bryce Young a little bit, which probably annoys some of y'all. I've always thought he was a good quarterback. I'm like relatively high on the Panthers for the upcoming year. NFC South is always a little bit of a wild card. Bryce Young rookie cards maybe, Panthers futures maybe. I have a little bit of a suspicion about the Panthers for the upcoming year. New coach in place, a little bit of a suspicion about that. Frank Patterson says, how is freshman Big O 2.0 looking in practice so far? Assuming you mean Bo Walker. We talked about him a little earlier in the show. It seems like it's pretty good so far. He also says, how can Kirby always challenge the fans if he doesn't give in and give the common fan something more than they get? Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the crux of the matter here right now is that, Kirby's always been really good about like starting his press conference after the big games of, man, we had the fans. Oh, they were great. Like Kirby is so good about stuff like that, making them feel a part of it. Been really good about that. Obviously, this past year was the Auburn game, I guess it was, where he was, a little bit critical. And I thought the response to that was actually pretty interesting because, Kirby has somewhat universal approval from Georgia fans. It's pretty unanimous in terms of how much, obviously, Georgia fans love Kirby Smart. But some of the sort of low-grade tension that I'm talking about, you saw some of that after the Auburn game. You did see some of that. You did see some of that. The new freshman tight end. So, I mean, I would say that both those incoming guys, like Barbour, I think has a chance. I mean, the problem at Georgia is there's so many tight ends. Like, if you want to go back to the winter, a guy who was getting a lot of buzz was Jaden Riddell. That's always interesting to me of like, okay, when you've been here for a little bit, now you're sort of ready. And this was thought to be an athletic, dynamic tight end. So I think the problem that a Barbour and Elias Williams might have, and I guess that's who you're talking about, Williams, because you're making the Darnell Washington comparison. I'm sorry. I got confused. I almost think that Barbour is probably more game ready than Elias is, if I had to guess, and obviously my guesses are often wrong. But if I had to guess, Barbour more game ready than Elias is. But it's just really crowded. I mean, one of the other things that Connor had in his practice report the other day, if you're just looking at the various position groups, sort of who looks better on the hoof, you might say tight end's the best looking group of all. So that might be the case. So I saw Elias one time in person this year. I don't think he had a great game in the game that I saw him. They didn't actually throw to him a ton either. So maybe that's not, a good measurement necessarily. UGA Marine says if you could get every living alumnus to donate $100 to NIL, you would have a $36 million NIL fund. He says Classic City Collective has one-time donations. It doesn't have to be recurring. Yeah, I just think it's one of those things that, like, it sounds like that ought to be easy. But anybody who's ever raised money for a living will tell you that, like, unanimous participation is just very hard to get. And in fact, sometimes, if you want to know how the world works, this is how the world works. Sometimes you'll even hear this mentioned from a fundraising standpoint. Like, let's say that your office is trying to raise money for some sort of charity. Sometimes they'll even say, listen, our goal is 100% participation, not even a monetary goal. Their goal is 100% participation for the very reason that you mentioned, that if everybody participates and gives something, that actually adds up. But when it comes to a true voluntary gesture, for a lot of reasons, you are just not going to get anything close to unanimous participation. You're just not. And that's just sort of the name of the game. And there are people who fundraise for a living. And pretty much every athletic director now is somebody who basically is a person who fundraises for a living. That's just the name of the job. And there is a science to fundraising. And sort of stuff that sort of seems like it'd be easy is oftentimes a lot harder than you think it would be. Garrison Tucker says, who's the closest competitor to ESPN? I'm so sick of their pathetic coverage. Well, in a roundabout way, it's going to be Fox, because Fox is still a major player in sports. They still are, big rights holder. They've made a big push in college football. But when it comes to college football playoff in particular, the CFP has made it be known they are still, and oftentimes is the way that sort of agreements like this work. They have a long-standing relationship with ESPN, and they are still very comfortable with that. Let's see what else. Oh yeah. Taste of the Masters is out there. That's nice. I like that. That's always really fun. Shane Holiday also says, speaking of the Masters, you've never seen the prices in the Augusta National Pro Shop during the women's and the Latin events. Plenty of business being done there. Well, I actually been there for the ANWA, and you're right. I mean, there was a guy in front, and this happens a lot. Now, a lot of these people are just resellers because you can't buy the Augusta National stuff or like the Masters branded stuff any time other than in that building for that week. There was a guy in front of me. I kid you not. He rang up at least $12,000 worth of stuff. I'm talking about, I saw with my own eyes the register show a 5-figure sum of money. I mean, now it was obviously resale stuff, and they didn't bat an eye. They didn't question him. They didn't, sorry, I'm going to need to, we're going to limit you to 3 per customer. They just like stacks of the same hat, stacks of the same shirt, and it was like $12,000 or whatever it was. I mean, it was a 5-figure sum of money. The person right in front of me in line, I saw it with my own eyes, and they just walked him right on out of the store, and he just, I'm sure, put it right on eBay or wherever else. So yeah, there is some of that. Matt Rukavina says, in 9 years, we've gone from let's pack out Sanford Stadium for the spring game to no more spring games. It's dumb now. It is funny how quickly it changes. And we've actually seen this in the last few years where, and I do get this, it takes a lot of security, a lot of logistics to do a 93K thing. If you've noticed, like the last however many years, there has been no push for attendance at all. Like there has been, 93K day in 2016. Oh man, we got to have everybody there. It was really fun. And it worked out. There were like 100,000 people. Logistical nightmare. Just a total nightmare. Next year, a little bit of we want to have a big crowd, but nobody's calling for 93K. Hey, we want to have a big crowd. The last few years, if you'll notice, there has been no push for attendance whatsoever. It's one of those things of like, if and I think even the last couple of years, they've been very late even putting the tickets on sale. It's one of those things where like, you've got to really sort of know how to navigate the waters to even know kind of how to do it. There's tons of questions from Georgia fans. last year about when are the tickets going to go on sale? What's going on here with all this? Obviously, college campuses are not necessarily built for 100,000 people to be there at one time. It creates a huge, challenge for, the stadium ops and the local government, things like that. So there's not been much of a push for G-Day attendance the last few years. They'd be, seemingly happy if very few people came. Garrett Duggar says YouTube channels and outlets like DawgNation Daily are what diehard fans turn to. Now nobody's watching ESPN Day shows. Well, certainly for the kind of stuff we talk about, nobody's. And honestly, I am to a degree thankful for this kind of thing, which is, hey, years ago we sort of saw both a hole in the market and a market in the hole, that we thought we could build a business around the sort of thing that wasn't being talked about other places. And thankfully it's worked out that way. I don't take that for granted for one moment. It's one of the best blessings of my life. And all of that exists because, a very popular topic was being undercovered. And if that doesn't make a lot of sense to you, I think you're well within your rights to feel that way. Kind of the same. I mean, like whatever is driving some of the stuff that ESPN does is not market forces. It's just not. Because market forces would drive them in a different direction than they often choose to go. And like I said, in the discussion about like who killed the spring games, so one of these days maybe I'll write that book. Who killed the spring games? The fact that ESPN doesn't want to put its back into, sort of 365-day-a-year college football coverage the way that, it might for the NFL has got to be one of those reasons, or the way that it does for the NBA. The sort of off-season, who's going to get traded and who's going to form a super team and who's opting out. They spend the entirety of their shoulder programming dealing with issues like that. The NBA is nowhere near as popular as college football is. Not even close. Not even close. But nonetheless. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of those things I think you would be well within your rights to sort of wonder about. Ken Oldham says you can have a simulated game without fans with pumped-in crowd noise, but the electricity of real fans provides takes away from what the players, especially young ones, will like when they depend on that in the season. He says for that reason they need to keep G-Day. I totally agree. And this is not the point of your comment, but I'll tell you what it reminds me of is, how many of y'all went to games in 2020? First of all, 2020, worst year of my life. If you went to games in 2020, I don't know that I've ever heard a noise that I hated more, that just made me just break out in hives more than that fake crowd noise they were pumping in these games in 2020. I'm talking about not Sanford Stadium, all stadiums. They were all the same way. Where it's like they're trying to turn it up when they're supposed to and turn it down. It's just like they're trying to make it be like a real thing. But it was like worse than fake. It was so obviously fake that it was like somehow worse. It was awful. Awful. Matt Rugavina says, let's do this. Let's make the quote-unquote useless bowl games into spring games. The results can help influence the top 25 voting. I'd be anything that gives us more college football, I'd be in favor of. I think that's a good idea. Oh, yeah, so last night is that Super 7 event in Macon. Kirby typically speaks from that. I haven't heard anything from that. But Ryan Mosley and Caden Prothro are both being honored there. I love both those guys as players. I've seen them both. I think they're both really good. Let me pop over to Facebook for a moment before I get called out for potential fan outreach delinquency. All right, on Facebook for a moment. A couple of comments. Tennille Calvino going back to some of her 2020 memories. Yeah, Grady Darcy says the 2020 stadium noise was just pathetic, just awful. I'm talking about everywhere. Like it was so bad. It was such an affront to those of us, who love college football. Like, man, this is just not it. This is just not it. I mean, everybody knows that any championships won in 2020, just strict for the record. No, it doesn't. They don't count. Everybody knows that. Everybody says the same thing about that. Brian Whitaker says ever since the won back-to-back titles in 2021 and 2022, it just feels like so much has changed. It really does. And, like, I really try to fight against my instinct sometimes to, like, rail against even more of this than I sometimes do. Because on the one hand, it's still great. Like, college football is still so great, man. The season is so much fun. The week-to-week traveling to the games, talking about it, it's still so much. Honestly, we're having a good time talking about it right now. Like, it is still so great that you don't want to fixate too much on the stuff that's not so great. And on the one hand, that's really, really true. On the other hand, when it comes to all of the stuff that just sort of seems to be intentionally imposed, chaos sort of, forced on, this sport that we all love, it's sometimes hard to look around and not say, it doesn't have to be this way. At any point in time, somebody could just say no. And if the person who's powerful enough says no loud enough, I promise you it will stop. It will stop. It does not have to be this managed decline that it is right now. It doesn't. It doesn't. At any point in time, it could just stop. All it takes is no. All it takes is we're just not doing that. Because I can promise you this, the majority of Americans, and college football is a American, specialty. It's only in America, unlike most sports that have some international flavor. College football is an exclusively American entity and perhaps the only exclusively American sport. They do play like one game in Ireland, but it's an American thing. The majority of Americans favor college football looking something like college football has always looked. So the moment that someone steps up in defense of that, a majority of Americans will also say, yeah, you know what? I think that's probably a good idea. So a lot of the problems that college football seems to have right now with the sort of never-ending change you're talking about, some of that can be traced back to the fact that no one powerful enough has just simply said no loud enough. Lucy Bauer-Sporkin says she's either ahead or behind on all comments. Well, Lucy, I'm sorry I missed your comments. Chastain Coleman says, I was planning on taking my two little girls to their first game for G-Day. With the rising ticket prices, it's getting harder to afford a one during the season. It sucks that college football seems to be forgetting that people who make it great are the fans. Yeah, and the next generation of fan, I would say that too. And listen, hey, maybe Georgia completely surprises what I expect to happen. And if they do, I'm more than happy to give them credit. And like many things, more than happy to say, hey, I was wrong about this. Maybe Georgia has an amazing experience for fans planned. And maybe it's not G-Day the way we've known it in the past. Maybe it's something that turns out to be better. If they do, there's not one part of me that wants to be right at the expense of giving credit if they do the right thing on this. Not one part of me. I have no ego about this. No ego whatsoever. I just simply want to stand up for people like Chastain who want to cultivate the next generation of fans. And I want to make it as easy for those people as possible. Kirk Schultz says, as usual, money is the root of all evil, and that is a fact, undeniably. In this case, though, I don't know that – I mean, you can't be good at football without money. You have to do some sort of service to generate the sort of big dollars that you need. But I would say that you can also do other things too. Like, I'll give you a small example of this. Like, remember a couple of years ago, Georgia put the Good Ice in Sanford Stadium. I guess it's the fast food place that has what people think of as the Good Ice. They just started putting that in Sanford Stadium. Like, that's a very small thing. I'm imagining there's very little. They may have sold more sodas, but they already sell, I would imagine, a good number of sodas. That's just a small sort of fan thing that I'm sure there's not a huge profit margin for that. Just nice for fans. Sometimes you do a thing just because it's sort of a nice thing to do. You want to be, the sort of organization that sort of does that sort of thing. Del Calvino says she'd be surprised if Kirby cancels it. He's as much of a traditionalist as we are. I mean, and listen, he's got a right to feel the way he wants to feel. He does not have to service my, needs with his opinions. But, Tennille, if I'm being honest, I do have to admit that one of the things that's disappointing the last couple of weeks is is that on this particular issue, Kirby's nowhere near as much of a traditionalist as I hoped that he would be. I mean, his own comments would seem to suggest that. And as I said before, I'm not his boss. He didn't have to satisfy me on this. I'm a big boy. I've been, told what I don't want to hear before, and I've lived, so no one's going to die if Georgia doesn't have a G Day. I do get that, but what I hoped I would hear from Kirby Smart, I do have to admit we have not been hearing that. That his adherence to tradition on this, not what it once was. All right, it's gotten late. Let's do a quick wrap around the comment section. We'll get ready to do this. Henry Dion says it's not money; it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. Yeah, that's obviously true. Frank Patterson's going to be coming up from South Florida for one of the big home games this year. That's a big deal. I wonder if they'll let Frank throw out the football equivalent of the first pitch. Maybe they will. All right, what else is going on? Anything else before we go? Okay, we'll do that one. We'll do one more reminder about the bracket before we're done. Let me take a couple more comments, and then we'll get ready to go. Back at DawgNation.com just for a moment. Gareth Duggar says 2016, 2017 G-Day are some of my best memories. I tell you, some of my best memories are like way before Georgia had any hopes of ever like winning a championship or anything like that. Like late 80s, going there with my grandparents, and just like I'm very sentimental about stuff like that. So, I am not coming at this topic from a what do you call it, like an unbiased or objective place necessarily. I definitely come at this from someone who's probably a little too deeply entrenched into it all. All right, so let's get ready to go. Hey, one more time, our buddy Danny's got this. One more time on the bracket challenge. Now, last year the graphic was even. This is it was pretty Spartan graphic a year ago, but even it had a little bit of background image stuff like that. This is just like basic, just not quite Times New Roman, but might as well be. Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, very, very low tech, very, very simple, but a ton of fun. And for the first time ever, a couple of actual promises attached to this. Winner comes on the air. First 200 people get a little Golden Shoe token of appreciation. All you got to do, send me your name, your mailing address, your email, your phone number to brandon.adams@DawgNation.com. I'll send you back a link. We'll keep up with all of this, and we'll have a good time with all of that. So have a great day. Thanks to R.S. Andrews for making it all possible. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them on that. So have a great day. We will see you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We will look forward to talking to you then.